At minus 71 degrees Celsius, even machines fail. Even wolves hesitate. But deep in the Siberian wilderness, a 90-year-old widow stood alone in the snow, not with a weapon, but with a will that refused to freeze. This is not a story about survival. It's about defiance at the edge of the world. Long before maps gave names to this place, before roads dared to cut through the white silence, she was already here. Siberia did not welcome her. It tested her, and she stayed. She arrived as a young bride, when winters swallowed sound and summers passed like a whisper. Back then, survival was not a story. It was routine. You learned which trees burned longest, which winds warned of storms, and which silence meant danger. Her husband learned those things beside her, until one winter he didn't come back. Grief froze quickly in Siberia. There was no time to collapse. Her children grew, then left. South, where the cold didn't break bones and the nights didn't last forever. They begged her to come with them, promised warmth, comfort, doctors, soft beds. She refused, not out of stubbornness, but out of loyalty. This land had taken everything from her, and in return, it had shaped her into someone unbreakable. At 90, her hands trembled when she lifted her cup. But those same hands still split firewood with patient precision. They still knew how to coax a flame from damp kindling. They still read the wind the way others read clocks, listening for shifts, sensing warnings, respecting what could not be controlled. Electricity never came here. Rescue never waited nearby. If something went wrong, it was just her and the truth. The cold was familiar. Loneliness, too. She spoke to the land when nights grew long. To the trees, the snow, the memories buried beneath it all. This cabin wasn't shelter. It was a vow she had kept for decades. She had survived famine winters, illness, loss, and she believed, quietly, that if death ever came for her, it would do so honestly. Face to face, not by fear, not by abandonment. But Siberia had one more test waiting, and it was already moving through the trees. That night, Siberia revealed its true face. The temperature fell to 71 degrees C, a cold so deep it no longer felt like weather, but punishment. The kind of cold that stripped breath from lungs before it could become air. Each exhale crystallized instantly, hanging in front of her like shattered glass before falling to the floor. Inside the cabin, the walls groaned. Wood contracted with sharp, cracking sounds, as if the house itself were struggling to stay alive. Outside, metal did not bend, it snapped. Nails burst. Hinges fractured. Even iron surrendered at that temperature. She woke before the cold could kill the fire. Years of instinct pulled her upright, heart pounding, not from fear, but from recognition. Something was wrong. The stove no longer hummed with warmth. The faint orange glow that usually painted the walls was dim, unstable, dying. She moved slowly, deliberately. Panic wasted energy, and energy was life. Her bare feet touched the floor, and pain shot upward like knives. She wrapped herself tighter in wool and stepped toward the stove, hands already reaching for tools she had used thousands of times before. She opened the iron door. The fire flickered. Once, twice, then collapsed inward like a tired heart. Ash drifted upward, cold and weightless. The heat vanished instantly, swallowed by the temperature pressing in from every crack in the cabin. Within seconds, the room began to change. Moisture froze along the walls. Frost bloomed across the window panes like white flowers of warning. She tried to feed the stove, would bark, anything that might catch. But the draft was wrong. The chimney had iced over. The fire refused her. This was dangerous. More dangerous than illness. More dangerous than hunger. Without heat, the body does not fight. It simply slows, then stops. She closed the stove door and sat very still, listening. That was when she noticed it. The silence. Not the peaceful kind she had lived with all her life. Not the quiet of falling snow or resting trees. This silence was hollow. Empty in the wrong way. The forest had stopped breathing. No wind in the branches. No distant crack of ice shifting. No night birds. Nothing. Her pulse slowed, not from cold, but focus. In Siberia, silence like that meant only one thing. She stood and moved toward the window, wiping frost away with the sleeve of her coat. Outside, the moon cast pale light across the snow, turning the world into a frozen ocean. Shadows stretched long and sharp between the trees. Then she heard it, low, almost gentle, a sound that vibrated through the ground rather than the air. A growl. It came again, closer this time. Then another, answering it from a different direction. Slow, patient, coordinated. They were not passing through. They were circling. Wolves. Not a single desperate animal driven by hunger, but a pack. She could tell by the spacing of the sounds, by the way the forest seemed to narrow around the cabin. They moved like a thought being completed. She had seen wolves before, many times, from a distance, across frozen lakes or at the edge of tree lines. They usually avoided her cabin. Fire and human scent kept them away. But tonight, there was no fire. The stove was cold. The air carried weakness. And hunger makes calculations fear never could. She backed away from the window and sat on the edge of her bed, conserving warmth. Her fingers burned as blood retreated inward. Every movement had to be deliberate now. A fall, a mistake, a moment of confusion. Any of it could be final. The howls began. One long, haunting call cut through the night, rising and falling like a question asked to the sky. It was answered almost immediately. Then another. Then another. The pack was communicating, marking territory, testing resolve. She closed her eyes, not to hide, but to think. Her mind did not race. It narrowed. She had survived blizzards that erased villages. She had outlived sickness that took stronger bodies. She had buried the only man who ever stood beside her through winters like this. She was still here. Her hands trembled as she reached for her coat, not from fear, but from cold and age. 90 years had thinned her strength, but not her memory. She knew what wolves respected: fire, noise, certainty, and she knew what they hunted: weakness. Another growl rolled through the night, closer now. She heard the crunch of snow, measured steps, not rushed. They were confident. She stood slowly, bones aching, joints protesting, and reached for the old axe leaning against the wall. Its handle was worn smooth by decades of use. It felt heavier than it used to, but familiar. The wolves howled again. Closer. They were not afraid of her age. They were not afraid of her solitude. They were waiting for the cold to do their work. The cabin creaked as the temperature continued to fall. Frost sealed the edges of the door. Time was no longer measured in hours, but in heartbeats. She tightened her grip on the axe and took one slow breath, careful not to waste it. This land had shaped her with ice and loss. And tonight, it was asking a question. Would she yield to the cold? Or would she remind the wilderness that she was still alive? The shadows began to move. At first, it was subtle, dark shapes sliding between the trees, almost blending into the night. Then the moon shifted, and the forest betrayed them. Yellow eyes ignited one by one, reflecting the pale light like embers buried in snow. They were closer than she had hoped. Not rushing, not careless, waiting. She counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. More shapes beyond, half-hidden, circling wider. A pack that knew its advantage. Hunger had sharpened them, but desperation made them bold. Winter had stripped the land bare, and instinct had drawn them toward the one place where warmth and weakness still lingered. Her cabin. Her. Her throat tightened as fear finally arrived, sharp and undeniable. It settled in her chest, heavy but familiar. Fear had walked beside her through decades of Siberian winters. It had been there the night her husband never returned. It had sat with her during storms that erased the world beyond her door. Fear had never been enough to stop her before. She did not scream. She did not hide. She listened. The wolves shifted their weight in the snow. She heard paws crunch softly, careful not to waste energy. The wind carried their scent toward her, wild, sharp, alive. One low growl rolled forward, testing her response. She understood the message. Are you still here? Her hand shook as she reached for the coat hanging beside the door. It was her husband's thick, heavy, stitched and restitched so many times the original fabric was barely visible. It still smelled faintly of smoke and pine, of a life shared and survived. She slipped her arms into it slowly, feeling its weight settle over her shoulders like a memory standing guard. The cold hit her instantly. Even inside the cabin, the air burned. Outside, it would be unforgiving. At 71 degrees C, exposed skin did not ache. It screamed, then went numb. She knew the risk. One stumble, one frozen breath taken too deep, and she might not make it back inside. But wolves did not respect doors. They respected presence. She wrapped a scarf over her mouth, pulled her hat low, and reached for the axe. Her fingers were stiff, reluctant to close, but they obeyed. 90 years had weakened her muscles, not her will. For a moment, she paused at the door, not to pray, not to hesitate, but to remember. The man who had split wood beside her. The children who had once laughed in this same snow before life carried them away. The countless winters that had tried and failed to claim her. Then she opened the door. The night rushed in like a living thing. Cold slammed into her chest, stealing breath instantly. Snow squealed under her boots as she stepped outside, the sound impossibly loud in the frozen stillness. The wolves froze. Their eyes locked onto her, surprised, curious, calculating. They had expected silence, stillness, a body waiting for the cold to finish its work. Instead, they found her, small, bent with age, standing. She raised the axe just enough to be seen, not as a threat, but as a statement. The wind tugged at her coat, snapping it like a flag. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her heart pounded, each beat slow and deliberate. Fear was there, but did not own her. She took one step forward into the snow, then another, planting herself between the cabin and the trees. The wolves shifted again, uncertain now. Hunger urged them closer. Instinct warned them otherwise. She met their eyes without blinking. In that frozen moment, the wilderness understood something it often forgets. This woman was not prey. She was still part of the land, and she was not finished yet. She did not run. Running was for those who believed escape was possible. At 71 degrees C, nothing outran the cold. Nothing outran fear once it took control. She did not scream either. Screams carried panic, and panic told predators exactly what they wanted to hear. Instead, she moved, slowly, deliberately, with the certainty of someone who had faced worse and survived. She planted her feet into the snow until it packed hard beneath her boots, anchoring herself to the earth. The cold gnawed at her legs, climbing upward, but she ignored it. Pain was temporary. Hesitation was fatal. She lifted the axe, not high, not dramatic, and brought its metal edge down against the iron barrel beside the cabin. The sound exploded into the night. A sharp, ringing clang cut through the silence, violent and unnatural in the frozen air. It echoed across the trees, bouncing between trunks, breaking the careful rhythm the wolves had established. She struck again. Clang. Again. Clang. Each impact sent vibrations through her arms and into her chest. Her fingers screamed in protest, numb and burning at the same time, but she did not stop. The sound was not meant to hurt them. It was meant to confuse them. Then she reached into the snow and pulled free a bundle of dry bark and kindling she had prepared long ago. Because in Siberia, preparation was survival. She shoved it into a shallow metal tray, struck a match, and shielded the flame with her body. For a breathless moment, the wind threatened to steal it. Then the fire caught. Orange light burst into the white darkness, small but defiant. Heat flickered outward, weak but real. Smoke curled upward, sharp and bitter, carrying the unmistakable scent of human presence. Fire. The wolves hesitated. Their ears flattened. Their bodies shifted, no longer fluid, no longer certain. Hunger urged them forward, but instinct, the older voice, pulled them back. Fire was not just heat. It was memory. It was danger written deep into their blood. She straightened her spine as much as her age allowed and did the final thing wolves did not expect. She shouted, not a cry of terror, but a sound shaped by decades of storms, funerals, and long winters survived. Her voice tore into the night, raw, uneven, but powerful. It carried weight. It carried truth. This place is not yours. The wolves froze. They stared at her now, heads low, eyes narrowed. They were no longer looking at a weak, solitary figure. They were looking at something unfamiliar. Not prey, not easy, something older than hunger, something shaped by the same wilderness that had shaped them and had learned how to endure it longer. She took one step forward. The fire crackled. The metal rang once more under her hand. Smoke wrapped around her like a warning. The pack shifted again, uncertainty rippling through them. One wolf backed away, paws sliding slightly on the ice. Another followed. Their formation loosened, the careful circle breaking apart. They had miscalculated. This woman did not carry fear the way prey did. She carried it the way survivors do, acknowledged, controlled, mastered. One by one, they retreated, first into the shadows between the trees, then beyond the tree line, then into the frozen dark where moonlight could no longer follow. Their eyes vanished. The forest exhaled. She stood there long after they were gone, fire crackling at her feet, breath burning in her lungs. The cold still pressed in. The night was still deadly. But the question had been answered. At 71 degrees C, in the heart of the Siberian wilderness, the wolves had learned something essential. This was not a place of weakness, and she was not breakable. Dawn arrived without color. The sky did not glow pink or gold the way it did in gentler places. In Siberia, morning came pale and quiet, a thin light spreading slowly across an endless field of white. The night loosened its grip, but the cold remained, unyielding, absolute. She was still there, standing near the cabin, wrapped in layers stiff with frost. Ice crusted the edges of her coat. Her lashes were white, her breath shallow and measured. Every joint ached, every muscle trembled. Her fingers were numb, her cheeks burned. Patches of skin had turned hard and pale. Frostbite. Exhaustion pressed down on her like a physical weight. Her body begged her to sit, to rest, to finally let go. But she was alive. She had kept the fire alive through the darkest hours, feeding it slowly, carefully, conserving both wood and strength. Each movement had been deliberate, each breath earned. The wolves never returned. When the sun climbed higher, its light revealed the marks left behind. Paw prints frozen in retreat, a broken circle in the snow where the pack had once waited. Proof that the night had been real, that her defiance had not been imagined. Hours later, the sound reached her ears. Not wind, not ice, an engine. The noise was distant at first, foreign and startling. She leaned against the cabin wall as the vibration grew louder, echoing across the frozen land. A rescue team, alerted by weather stations and overdue check-ins, finally broke through the isolation she had lived with for decades. When they reached her cabin, they moved quickly, urgently, expecting the worst. They did not find a body. They did not find a victim. They found her, still upright, still conscious, a small fire smoking beside the cabin, an old axe resting in the snow like a silent witness. Her eyes, tired but clear, met theirs without fear. The men froze, unsure of what they were seeing. A 90-year-old widow, alone, at 71 degrees C, alive. They wrapped her in blankets, checked her hands, her face, her pulse. They spoke softly, as if loud voices might shatter something sacred. One of them shook his head slowly, unable to hide his awe. This woman had not survived by accident. She had refused to surrender. Not to the cold, not to hunger, not to the wilderness itself when it demanded her life. As they helped her toward the warmth of the vehicle, the cabin stood behind her, silent, scarred, still standing. Just like her, in the endless white silence of Siberia, a legend remained. Not written in books, not carved in stone, but proven in frost, fire, and unbreakable will. This wasn't about age, or wolves, or even the cold. It was about a generation shaped by hardship, where survival wasn't heroic, it was normal. At 90, she proved something the world forgets. Strength doesn't disappear with time. It hardens, and sometimes, In the coldest place on Earth, it still stands tall when everything else runs.